Without competition, there would be no cars, no refrigerators, no ketchup, no Hot Wheels or Barbie, no electricity, no space program, no COVID vaccines. And without cooperation, there would be no NFL, no Major League Baseball, no rubber, no computers, no internet, no space program, no cars, no Barbie, no Hot Wheels, no refrigerators, no COVID vaccines. You see, there's this dialectic between these two aspects of our nature. And they both have healthy expressions and unhealthy expressions, cooperation and competition. Within the metaphysics that we've laid out, these two aspects of the human being seem to continue to unfold themselves. Women seem to have a better sense of cooperation. Men seem to be deeper into their world of competition. Maybe it's a testosterone issue. But both of these modes of being in relationship are integral to the progress of the human family, of consciousness, and of evolution. And the issue really gets down to, can we find healthy expressions? We know that both, again, are integral to our evolution. But we've also learned that in education, especially in children, that competition dissolves self-confidence and literally creates self-doubt. And for those who are really good at winning in competition, they end up many times using an external source of validation for the rest of their life because of that. Now, we've learned that and I worked on some projects with some grant money on a middle school project. We know that in education, cooperation is the way it has to go. It needs to be cooperation first, then competition. We need to see this greater aspect of stuff. And we now know that, say competition, healthy expression, in adults leads to hostility and greed. And these are elements that actually impede progress. So competition has kind of a feedback piece. So how do we talk about it? Unhealthy competition, if you go to a place called Goski Bound, he talks about scarcity and fear. When competition is unhealthy, it presupposes that there's only a limited amount of success or achievement available. You see what that does? Also, unhealthy people in this, they get, again, their validation and attention from being competitive. Also, another unhealthy aspect, diminishing others. When we start diminishing others in our competition, I'll tell you, one of the things I love about baseball and football, and even basketball, is these people, I just tackled you, but I'm going to help you up. You just got a single, and I'm playing first base. How you doing? Good hit. It's an amazing thing when we have this healthy thing. And there's also another unhealthy aspect, is winning at all costs. It's not good. But again, there's competition that is healthy. Advancing the entire field or organization. Unlocking our personal potential. Let's face it, competition does push us. It also honors mutually held values. This in sports is very, very important. Honor, grit, fairness, integrity. You can see them on the play field. As well, you'll notice that people who have a healthy sense of competition, it's not about the outcome, it's about the journey. They're not so much competing against somebody in order to look better than them. They're competing against themselves to break their own potential record. It's an amazing piece when you see this healthy expression. In cooperation, what can I say? I really believe in my conclusion of all the stuff I've read is that our children should be they should be in small groups, especially by the time of middle school, and they should be looking at cooperation and how to do things together. And of course, there's still the sports and all that. I watch a lot of TV with my toddler, and we watch. He calls it baby TV, but it's baby university. And even when they have races, all three are always happy, and they're always happy for the person who wins. And the person who wins always has a tire to put around the other person, or an arm, whatever they're racing, so that the competition is framed within a context of cooperation. That really, I mean, look at the NFL and the MLB. They have to cooperate at so many layers before they can get to the field and compete. And this is part of the dialectic, and that's what I want us to see. There's a conversation going on between competition and cooperation, and both are necessary for the advancement of the species and consciousness. Now, I just laid out a lot. I kind of did my opening belch. So, Bob, cooperation and competition, not versus, but and competition. What say ye?
Yeah, that's really the secret, that neither can really exist without the other. We've talked in many of our shows about how human beings don't exist outside of social groups, whether it be the family or your associate, your close friends, your workmates, and so forth. There's never been a human being that existed without other human beings. And that necessitates cooperation. And it's like many of the other things we've talked about. When you've got two different things that seem to be opposed, the danger is when you go too far in either direction. When you get too much competition, where people begin to feel bad when they aren't the winner, and the winner begins to feel more important than the other people, that's pushed it too far. Sports is, we were always taught when we were very young and just getting into sports about what sportsmanship is. And sportsmanship, the idea was that everyone was trying the best they could, and you should always shake hands with the person you beat and say, yeah, hey, I know you tried hard, and, that kind of stuff. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen, especially in professional sports, it move a little bit too far toward the competition side, when you've got people standing over their opponent and, wagging their finger at them saying, I've got you, you're never going to be any good. You can't play against me. That's just, it's a philosophy that some coaches use. They try and fire up their team and say, you got to go out there to battle.
I will say, though, the new NFL rule about taunting is quite interesting, that it's actually a rule that cuts off that piece.
They're going through some real controversies and some difficulties with that rule. But just real quick, the anthropologist Ruth Benedict did an extensive cross-cultural study where she compared different types of cultures on essentially the dialectic that you've laid out, cooperation and competition. And her distinction, she called it cultural synergy. Her distinction was some cultures, individuals' actions or skills benefit both themselves and the group. Whereas in other cultures, the individual's skills and actions benefit themselves at the expense of others. And she found that by many different measures, happiness being one, the cultures that were able to collaborate, that were able to cooperate, had much happier individuals in the culture.
Amen.
And Amen. It's that level of competition which goes too far that creates frustration and creates conflicts. And so again, like most everything else, I'll throw my favorite word in. We have to come into this with a balance.
Amen. And I'm going to stop you there and say that is the rub right there, is because we're just now seeing in in an empirical way how important cooperation is. And, again, I think testosterone, Einstein wrote a great paper as the Second World War was coming on and said, I think this is a testosterone problem. So it's a really interesting thing. In Native Americans, and Marianne, I'll turn it over to you in a second. Native America, the Cherokees, they would, before they were sent west, had cities of 5,000-6,000 people, and they would rule by consensus. And after the third day of council, the men would say, I'm going hunting. And then the women would sit around and cooperate and put everybody's interest, and they would be the governing body, basically, because the men didn't have the patience to sit around. And it's this great divide as well as a place where we are joined together if we dare to again, bring up that word balance. So, Marianne, we just laid out a whole lot, and now we put it in your lap and say, what say ye?
Well, I kind of see it a little bit differently. I think competition is something that we need to evolve from and move towards cooperation. Yes, there are some good things that came out of competition, but I think that's because that was what we thought we needed to strive for excellence. And so if the only way that you can be the best that you can be is by dominating or beating someone else, then yes, that will fuel you forward, and that will create some really good things. And you're right, it can be healthy competition or it can be unhealthy competition where and Bob, I liked what you talked about, how if you are competing in order to create a better society for everyone, then there's good that comes out of it. If you're competing just to become the best and to dominate, then yes, that's bad. But I think that as we go forward, we're finding we need more and more cooperation versus that competitive model. And I think that if we use our internal control, our locus of control as an internal thing versus the external, then we can still strive for excellence without having to dominate.
It's interesting because once you put, like what you just did, it's not both and, it's either or, and you're choosing cooperation. Once you do that, you have actually put cooperation in competition with competition. And that is the feedback loop that makes me want to say we got to get rid of the either or. So I will say that as long as it's either or you think one is better than the other, you keep them in a competitive relationship with each other. And that's part of the paradox of the whole argument and the dialectic that I'm trying to lift up to just show how important both of these are. And, there's no way we're going to get rid of competition. We would not have the COVID vaccine if it wasn't for competition. And it was very healthy competition. There was a couple places where it got a little rough and people called to task. It's a really interesting story. Again, it's Code Breakers, the story of Jennifer Doudna by Walter Isaacson. It shows how integral to the human condition competition is, and also how important competition always be framed within a larger context of cooperation. So I would say that cooperation is a higher order of relationship than competition. But I wouldn't say that we have to get rid of competition. That's never going to happen unless the human being evolves out of the body.
Well, I think part of that whole idea of an either or, I see it more as it's an evolutionary thing. And competition is not at war with cooperation, but cooperation is a higher order. And yes, I think we can evolve out of competition. And possibly what we're doing here is a difference of terminology as well. Because what you're talking about with competition, you're talking about excelling and creating the best that we can be.
Which is what competition does. Healthy competition creates higher orders of process and of thinking and of understanding and of creativity. And we know that.
Are you saying that human beings cannot achieve that without competing with each other?
They won't.
So
Competition and cooperation are they are two aspects of a single event. And it's just
part of being what it means to be a human being. Then is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Now again, there's healthy competition and unhealthy.
That's important. That adjective is very, very important. Healthy competition.
I disagree.
And that the distinction there, if we lose that distinction between healthy competition, which enables us to exercise our skills and compare ourselves to other people and try and improve ourselves and so forth, without denigrating the other person, without putting the other person down, that's when it becomes unhealthy. And that's when it leads to all sorts of problems, from anxiety to stress to anger and so forth.
And it's important to say that we are at that place as a people. And so I understand what Mary Ann's perspective is.
Well, I do too. But again, let's go back to sports. Healthy competition. You look at someone like Jerry Rice in football, who was the greatest receiver. And all the other receivers want to do as well or better than him, but they all acknowledge him because the level of skill was so high, so much higher than most of them. And it doesn't mean that they're not good, and he doesn't put anyone else down. But it's that healthy competition that says, I want to be the best that I can be at whatever activity I'm engaged in, and it's the competition.
But is he competing with others, or is he competing with himself? Is he
Both.
trying to be the best that he can be, or is he trying to diminish others?
No,
Well,
see,
he's
that's
not
the
trying to
thing. You
diminish
think,
others.
Mary Ann, you seem to have an inherent understanding that if I exceed and excel better than someone else, the mere fact diminishes them. And that's the context that we have to shift and change, because most healthy athletes they are competing against the other in order to become a better player themselves, a better gymnast themselves. I assure you, when those people on the beam started doing that stuff, and other gymnasts were going, "Whoa, I wonder if I can do that." And my daughter was in that, and she scared the crap out of me.
I completely understand competition as a measurement against others, and to excel to what it is that you're trying to achieve. What my whole view of all of this is that it's a number, it's a comparison, but it doesn't have to be competitive. It can be, I am showing you what we can achieve as a human being, what we can achieve as an athlete. I'm showing you that there are no limits in what we're doing. And so that, to me, and again, I think I go back to, it could be just the idea, the terminology, and we may be talking about the same thing. I guess the layers of competition and what we've seen in unhealthy competition has kind of diminished that word for me. And maybe it's kind of like it's loaded with a lot of pretty negative things.
Well, if you listen to the list of what constitutes unhealthy, they all are descriptive of Trump. And it's really interesting that we've created, if you look at right now, men's cologne commercials, they're all about the loner. They're all about the loner alone in the desert. Or playing guitar, but they're, and it's this me above the world. I'm going to conquer it. I'm my own man. And that's part of the revolution that's occurring right now. And I think, Bob, I'm going to go back to Bob's balance, because what's happened is competition has been overvalued and has created an unhealthy environment. And I mean, that's why they needed a no taunting rule in football, because the players were getting carried away. So that we are at a crossroads where we're beginning to understand what even and we've talked about this on so many fronts, what constitutes healthy versus unhealthy. And we're just now on the cusp of getting what that is, much less a balance. Go ahead, Bob.
I think that we have to be very, very careful when we try and make generalities, because competition, cooperation occurs in situations. We have to look at situation by situation. And it doesn't negate anything that we've said about balance and about healthy versus unhealthy and so forth. But there are times when excellence can occur in a group where everyone is cooperating, and then that group can be in competition with another group. That's how we got the COVID vaccines, you know. So there are situations where competition is necessary, healthy competition. There are situations when it can go overboard. And we have to be very, very careful to examine each situation in its own unique way and determine what the appropriate balance between competition and collaboration
and that's part
is in that situation.
That's part of what we're trying to figure out right now as a human family. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was going to say, I think as a culture and as human beings, I think we have taken competition to a very unhealthy level in our society. Yeah. When you look at these shows like The Voice, or you look at baking shows, and you look at people who are competing with their art, to me, it's like, that's art. So why do you have to compete? Why can't you just excel and be the best that you can be?
Marianne, do you have a hard time? This is important. Do you have a hard time seeing other people are different than you, and that when you say, "How come they can't?" Well, they're not you. When you look at them, you have to say, "That's who they are. How can I best be in relationship with them?" But when you start, see, what you just did, in my mind, is diminished those who like to compete. And I don't think that's particularly fair. I think I have no problem with people that are different than I am. What I have a problem with is that we have placed too much emphasis on being better than someone else rather than being the best that we can be. And so that's the place that I'm coming from. Yeah, but what you're doing is, go ahead, Bob.
Let's talk about The Voice as a situation. Here, all these people are trying to break into show business by singing. Every one of those people can't sell 1 million records. It's never going to happen. It's just unrealistic to think it will. So competition is inherent in the business that they want to become a part of.
Right. It's inherent.
And if you see them interacting with each other, they're very supportive of each other. They don't mind, if they don't win at a certain level, they congratulate the person that has moved to the next level. But competition is going to be part of their lives. If they win this thing, that's just the first step, and they're going to be competing with every other singer and songwriter to sell more albums, to get a larger crowd at their shows. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as they're still respectful of each other and they don't denigrate each other.
Bob, you just made my point. My point is, the reason that they're doing it is for a financial gain rather than for the art itself.
See, I think you just projected something on them that wasn't them. I happen to know, as a musician, I have never done what I do for money. And most musicians are doing their dharma. And I'll tell you how much energy it takes to do that. So I think, in my mind, you just offended a lot of musicians by saying that what they're after is money and not to express themselves, because,
No, I'm not. The artist.
That's what you said, though.
No, the artist is going for excellence and to win. The promoters, those are the people that are going to monetize their dreams, their gifts, their talents. And so what you're talking about is we're only going to promote you if you can sell 1 million records. We're not going to promote you because you have talent, and we're not going to put you out into the world because you have something to offer. We are going to only promote you
See, that's such an either-or world.
We can prove,
I don't think I don't.
When we can prove that you can make money, and I
think there are people like that.
What's a promoter's job?
It's baked into capitalism. It is baked in,
and that's good. I think that's good.
Well, I'm kind of like the women sitting around the fire and going, let's figure out what's best for everybody.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a book called The Dispossessed, and she showed the messy side of competition and how all that works, and she showed the messy side of cooperation and how all that works. And I would recommend that to our listeners. And Marianne, if you haven't read it, because it woke me up to my own inability to see some stuff that are implicated if we lived in a world that was totally cooperative and had no competition really in it. So we're at the end of our time, believe it or not. I want to say here that the real issue for me is in education, that the focus needs to move away from competition, and we need to teach cooperation first. I got to work on a curricula for middle schools, and it was basically for small groups to travel with Marco Polo and to travel with Lewis and Clark, and basically do all the math, do all the mapping, do all the wildlife stuff, and it was in small groups. We know that by middle school there should be small groups, but what do? We have these big middle school people where the kids are dispersed, and what happens? They form their own groups that are called cliques that include and become in competition with each other. We need to teach cooperation first, and then we need to create a healthy field of competition. I think we've done that with a lot of sports, and I'm thankful for that because I like sports. So that's my final comment here. Marianne, I'll give you the first crack at final comment on your front.
Well, I think that you're right. I see that competition has had some very negative effects in the world, but I also understand that we have to strive for excellence. I just happen to think that we don't have to compete in order to strive for excellence. And I think that once we can understand that we are all in this together, and that everything that I do is going to be for the benefit of everyone because we are connected, or to the downfall, then I think that the idea that we have to beat someone else, and that's where I go to with competition. It's not just striving for excellence, and that I think we can do within ourselves and push our limits.
And that's how we do that and how we feel pushed. I know in my life, if I hadn't have felt pushed by some of the competitive stuff, I never would have taken the next step. And mostly it was because somebody put me down and said I couldn't do it. And I went, hey, yeah, screw you, dude. I can do that. Bob, comments, final?
Well, I'll go back to the idea of healthy competition. I think that we have to find ways in which we can compete in a healthy way that doesn't beat someone. It was interesting, the term you used there, Marianne. And I appreciate what I see in you as a very utopian view of this whole topic. And I think that maybe in the future will be more toward the collaborative end of everything. But I think that healthy competition, and it's been shown pretty much across the board, that winning can enable someone to excel while other people are also excelling. Maybe not quite as much, but when everyone is trying their best, and that's the feedback that has to happen. Not that the winner is better than anyone else, but the winner has excelled a little bit more in this particular race or in this particular instance, but everyone else has the opportunity to also excel. And I'll go back to Jerry Rice. He used to take people from other teams and work out with them in the off season and show them how he worked out so they could excel in their own team. He still wanted to beat their team, but at any rate, I think that we need both, and we need both in a healthy way.
Amen. And I will say, regarding both of what you all have said, that the largest innovative engine in the history of the human being came out of cooperation between United States industry, government, and education. So we know that cooperation is going to have the higher yield, but within that arena, there are pockets of competitiveness that create the next piece. And Bob, what you said, which was really important to me, is you said, I think about the 4-minute mile. I think it was the 4-minute, maybe it was a 3-minute. Once somebody showed that could be done, then the next person said, well, wait a minute, if they can do it, I can do it. And then they pushed themselves a little harder. In the search for the CRISPR gene that allowed us to make these vaccines, they were playing off of each other in ways like, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And it doesn't just happen in industry and education, it happens in culture. And we've done that. If you go around the world, this time of year is amazing because we're approaching the longest night of the year. Now, if you look at the ancients, they didn't know about cycles. They originally thought this was Narnia, man, and that it was going to be cold forever and ever. And so they started creating rituals that would call back the light, that would call back the sun, that would call back the warmth, with the Yule log, with the evergreen, with the lighting of candles. This attempt to keep the light going. Menorah, Hanukkah's about this. Christmas was placed where it is, right there at the return of light after the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, wherever the solstice is that year. The solstice, Saturnalia. We're going to go here and we're going to show, I hope, how this peace is integral to all of us in our journey, where the dark gives way to the light and the great cycle of being. God's peace, may the one of one be all over you, and may love totally rock your soul.